In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to remove scars or stretch marks using Photoshop. All right, so on the screen now, we've got a pregnant belly and you can see the effect of the stretch marks here. And not only is there discoloration, but we've also got the scarring that is caused by the skin being stretched. So there's a couple of things that we need to deal with to be able to retouch this image correctly. So the steps that I'm going to use to get rid of these stretch marks is to first start with a hue saturation adjustment layer that's going to take care of the red in the stretch marks. All right, and then I'm going to use the clone stamp with a couple of different blend modes to get rid of the actual stretch marks themselves. And finally, finish up by adding a new skin texture over the top of that to make it all look a lot more realistic. And so you can see there's our before and there's our after. All right, so to retouch this belly, the first thing I want to do is take care of the discoloration that's caused by the stretch marks or scarring in this image. So you can see that this really sort of dark red marks caused on the stretch marks, we'll get rid of those first. So what I'm going to do is create a new hue saturation adjustment layer, and so that's this little icon here, circle half white half black. Click down on that and click on hue saturation layer, and there it is there. So now if I click on this little icon here, that's going to give me the properties for the hue saturation adjustment layer. If you don't see that, if that doesn't come up automatically, then go to Window and check Properties, and that'll bring it up. All right, so Window, Properties, and there it is. And so here are the adjustment sliders to create a hue saturation adjustment layer. And what I want to do is just target the red in this image here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, from my preset, from my drop down menu, select reds, and I'm going to come along with my clicker here, and what I want you to do is watch this area here, watch the shift in these three bars when I click on a red. So I'm going to tell Photoshop this is the kind of red I want to selectively adjust. I just want to adjust these particular colors. So if I click on that, did you see how that moved across? So Photoshop has now selected in the range of its colors where that particular red is. And now I can actually selectively adjust only those reds. But to do a better job, what I want to do is make sure that I'm only going to select those reds and not the reds that are in the overall image. So to do that, to make sure that I can see where these particular reds are, I'm going to increase the saturation and increase the hue on my image. And then I'm going to move my slider across to just isolate those particular red areas. And there they are. Now this whole step can sometimes be a little bit confusing when you're first learning it. So let me just show you a couple of other examples just so you can get a sense of what's going on. So on the screen now, I've got an image. I've got red, yellow, and blue on the screen. So I just want to show you what happens when we select a hue saturation adjustment layer. So I click on my properties box, and there it is there. The properties have come up. Now, I can now choose from the master drop-down menu to tell Photoshop which color I want to selectively adjust. So if I was to choose reds, I can now adjust the saturation, and you can see that only the reds are affected, okay? And I can change the hue, and it will only change the hue of the red areas. It leaves the blue and the yellow alone. So why do I go through the selectively choosing the area, and why am I using this slider here? Well, basically I can show you with a different image here. So let's say I'm going to add a hue adjustment layer, hue saturation layer to this one. So let's say that the flag and the doors and these areas around the posters are the areas that I want to change the color of the red. Maybe I want to make it green or blue or whatever. So if I was to hit my properties there on my hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to select my reds, and let's just say I want to change the hue. I want it to change it from red to maybe pink or blue, which I can do. But do you notice what else is happening? That there is red in this area, but there are subtle hints of red tones in the tiles of the roof. There's red tones in the pavement here, like you've got a pinky hue. There is some red tone in the road. And so as I change the hue, it changes the hue even in the doorway. There's red tone. There's red tone in the skin tone. Everyone's skin tone has red. So by selectively adjusting the red, if I just do it this way, it's going to selectively adjust the red where there is tones of red across the entire image. So the reason that I'm adjusting this slider here is because I just want to selectively target this particular tone of red that we locate here, and I want to exclude the red in the tiles and the reds in the skin tones. Now, another way I could do this is I could go to the trouble of masking it all out, but I think this is a much quicker way to do it. So the reason I'll select my reds. So I'm telling Photoshop this is the red that I want to look at. So it's told me, it's moved the slider to the area where it thinks that's a good match. And then what I do is I increase the saturation and I increase the hue all the way across to the right. And then I'm moving this slider so that I can selectively isolate. Like I'm telling Photoshop, I just want you to find these red skin tones or get it as close as possible. And I don't want you to look for the reds in these areas here. And so then I can move my slider across to the left, and you can see that the areas that are no longer highlighted, like aren't bright green, so you can see on the pavement as I go across to the right, they're highlighted in green. And as I go across to the left, I can see that it's no longer affecting the pavement. And the more I go across, and the idea is I want to stop about there. So now it's only influencing the flag, the door, the background, but it's no longer on the pavement, and it's no longer going to change the hue on the ceiling. So then I can bring everything back to 0. So that's the base. And then just using the hue slider, I can now change the hue, and it's only going to change the color of the areas that I want to change. So that's why I'm doing it in that way. I mean, it seems like an odd couple of steps. So hopefully that now makes a bit more sense. All right, so here is my selection, and I've got the saturation slider and the hue slider all the way across to the right so that I can actively, selectively target just the stretch marks or the scarring there on the tummy. So we'll move this back to 0 and move the hue back to 0 as well. All right, and now I can adjust the hue slider across to the right, and I'm going to keep moving it across until that color is the hue of the red blends in a lot better with the skin tone. So I'm just going across, and you'll see that only those areas are going to be affected, and it's usually around somewhere between 25 and 30 that I get something that looks a lot better. If I go too far, you'll find that it's going to start looking green, opposite of red. All right, and that's not working. So you can see now that it looks like something out of Alien, so that's no good. So I'll just scooch it back, and it's usually around 25. So something about there looks good, I think. So let's have a look. We've got before and after. So now that's the coloring taken care of. Now with a new adjustment layer, I'm going to tackle the actual scarring. So what I'm going to do is come down to this little icon here. It looks like a piece of paper with a fold in it. Click on that. That's a new empty adjustment layer. So basically, for those of you who haven't worked with layers, imagine that the original, this one down here, layer 0, is your original image. When we use an adjustment layer, it's like we're working on trace paper over the top. So if you make a mistake, you can just get rid of the entire layer and you're not going to lose all the other work that you've done. So this is like having an empty layer of trace paper over the top of the image. I'm going to click on the clone stamp. I'm going to make sure that I've got 0 hardness on my brush. The blend mode is set to lighten. By default, you'll find that it's normal. We're going to come down and change that blend mode to lighten. Opacity 100%, and I'm going to start with a flow of 5% and make sure that sample all layers is selected. Now the first thing I'm going to tackle using the blend mode of lighten with the clone stamp are the darker patches. So you can see that there are two kinds of scars if you look, or two kinds of scarring if you look very closely at the stomach here. You can see that there are darker areas and also where the skin has been stretched and then healed, you can see that there isn't any pigmentation in those areas, so that the scarring or the stretch marks are actually lighter. So it's a combination of light scars and darker scarring. So we're going to need to address those in two different ways. So first off, I want to deal with the darker areas, and that's going to be using a blend mode of lighten. So basically, when you use the blend mode of lighten with the clone stamp, what I'm actually doing is I'm doing skin grafts. So I'm selecting an area of good skin next to the area that I want to cover, and I'm telling Photoshop to take this skin and place it over the top of this skin. Now, by changing the blend mode from normal to lighten, what I'm actually now telling Photoshop is I only want you to put new pixels, or skin in this case, over the darker areas, and I want you to leave the lighter areas alone. And what this does is it actually gives a much nicer finish. So to do that, what I need to do is find that area of skin directly next to the darker area. So I'm going to choose this area here as my skin graft or clone area, and holding down the Option on a Mac, Alt on a Windows, I'm going to make a selection. So you can see that little icon there that tells me that I've made a selection. Click down with my mouse and then bring that graft over the top. And then I'm just going to go up and down over that area. And because my flow is so low, it means that I'm gradually building up, covering that scar area. So you can see before and after, it does a pretty good job, and it only covers the darker areas and it leaves the lighter areas alone. So let's tackle this one right here. So I'm going to hold down the Option on a Mac, Alt on a Windows, click, and come and brush over the top. All right, so it's leaving the light pixels and it's only covering the dark. All right, and we've managed to get rid of that there as well. So then it's just a matter of going over all the dark areas on this image and retouching those. And then I'm going to come back on a new layer and address the lighter ones. So all these ones down here, come in, find a clean, unblemished area of skin next to the scar and just brushing over the top. And you can see, and it's just a slow build up, and it does a really good job cleaning that up. So you can see down there before and after. All right, so I'll go ahead and finish all the dark areas here, and then we'll come back and address the lighter areas. All right, so you can see now that I've taken care of all that dark scarring or the stretch marks there. So now what's left are these lighter scars. And so what I'm going to do is create a new empty layer and change my blend mode from lighten to darken. So now what I'm saying to Photoshop is I only want you to place pixels over the lighter areas, and I want you to leave the darker areas alone. So I'm going to find some, we'll do this one first here. So I'm going to find a nice clean area of skin right next to that scar, and I'm going over that. And you can see it's only filling in the lighter pixels and it's leaving the darker pixels alone. Make sure my brush is 0 hardness and flow is nice and low, and I can go around and just clean up those lighter scars. There we go. All right, and then just zooming back every now and then to make sure. All right, so let's have a look. So we got before and after. All right, so I'll just go ahead and finish up on that, and then we'll do the final adjustment. All right, so the final thing I'm going to do to this image is just add back some skin texture, because once you start cloning over areas, it can start to look a bit flat and you lose some of the texture of the skin. So what I'm going to do is use the Miracle Skin texture, and that's one of the free downloads available in the community. So you can grab your Miracle Skin texture, and what I'm going to do, there it is there. Basically, there's two ways that you can place a new file on top of an image. You can open up the file and just use the move tool and drag it across like that. All right, and I'll just zoom out, and I just want to make sure that I increase it to cover the entire image. Or the other way that you can do it is that you can come down to File, Place Embedded, and then locate the item on your hard drive or computer desktop and hit place. And Photoshop then places it as a file on top of your image, and then it just saves that extra step. So I'm going to expand it out so that it covers the whole area. Hit OK. And now I'm going to change my blend mode from normal to overlay. All right, and you can see the texture of the skin is showing through. And the other thing that I want to do is I just want to make this skin texture a little bit darker. So I'm going to hit image, adjust brightness, contrast, and I'm just going to knock the brightness down maybe by about 50. So there, looks good about there. All right, so I've got that nice texture, but the problem is I've got skin texture on her pants and on the background. So what I'm going to do is add a layer mask to that. So that's that little icon there. And then I'm going to hide that layer mask so that it's now underneath the retouch. So if I click on the layer mask and hit Command I, if you're not sure about any of this, there is many detailed tutorials on understanding layer masks, so maybe go check those out. So I've inverted the layer mask, so basically I've hidden that, and if I get make sure that white is the foreground color, select a brush and make sure that it's 0 hardness, blend mode is normal, opacity 100%. I'm going to get my flow to around 10%. With a layer mask, wherever I brush with white is going to reveal what's underneath, which is the skin texture. So using the brush, I can now brush that skin texture over the belly here, wherever I need it. All right, and that's just, it just gets rid of that just retouched look and makes it all look a little bit more convincing. So something like that. Might make my brush a bit bigger so it doesn't take as long. And so that's now just adding some nice skin tone back to that belly area. So you can see before and after. I think that really helps. So that's the retouch in its entirety. I'll just group those into their new little layer set. So we've got before and after. And the other thing you can do is, if you want, you can group them all into layers and then just maybe reduce the opacity overall if you wanted to have something a little bit more natural, like so that the stretch marks were still there, just not as obvious. So maybe something like that. So you can still see them, but we've just softened them a little bit, you know, by 50% rather than going all the way that I've done here. So there's always options. And that goes for, you know, dealing with people's scars or birthmarks. You might want to follow this procedure, but then just bring it back a little bit so you're just softening the effect but not getting rid of it altogether.